All right, everybody. So you have finished the book, right? Part-time Indian. We read last night 2:14 to 2:30. So you're at the end of the book. So let's talk about the end of the book. How's it end? Well, he finds himself, right? This is just a heartwarming ending. You probably shed a tear or two, right? Um, it starts off with him and his family, and they go to the graveyard. And they're at the graveyard, and they're cleaning up Eugene's grave area, they're cleaning up Grandma Spirit's grave area, and they're cleaning up Mary's, his sister's area. And they just have a little moment, and Dad's like, "Look, I'm crazy about you." Mom says, "I love you. I'm proud of you." And he says, "Man, that was the best thing she could have said. That was amazing." As he's sitting there, he's sort of reflecting, and this is kind of sad because as he reflects about his reservation, he realizes a few things. He says, um, 5 or 10 or 15 more Spokanes would die during the next year, and that most of them would die because of booze. So this idea of alcoholism ruining families and ruining entire groups of people is here, and he recognizes it, and he says they're slowly killing themselves, but I want to live. So here's somebody taking a situation that's not great. He's really trying to pull deep from it, and he says, "You know what? I want to live. I don't want to do that. I'm not going to drink." Um, he also mentions reservations, and this is interesting. He says reservations were meant to be prisons. Indians were supposed to move on to reservations and die. We were supposed to disappear. But Indians have forgotten that reservations were meant to be death camps. That's a little bit ironic and actually a little contrasting with what he just said, right? All these Indians are alcoholics and they're all killing themselves. Meanwhile, they're on these reservations, which were meant to be death camps, but they forgot they were death camps. Kind of goes against itself, but I think what he's trying to say is that they're strong people. They're a group of people that even though they have these hard times and these difficult things that they have to deal with, they are able to overcome. Here's where he really starts to find himself. He says, "I realized that I was a Spokane Indian. I belonged to that tribe, but I also belonged to the tribe of American immigrants and to the tribe of basketball players and bookworms and cartoonists and teenage boys and small town kids and funeral goers and poverty and beloved sons." He realizes that he's a part of something, even though he's one person and even though he could be notched into the stereotypical Indian, he's not just that. And he's recognizing that he is all of these things. And then he sort of reflects on a time when he and Rowdy were together. So we have this little flashback here. And it just goes to show us a little bit more about his character and how strong he is and how he's been strong from the beginning. He was born weak, right? He was born weak. He was born with some physical disabilities that were overwhelming, that really did hold him back. But he wasn't weak on this day. They decide they're not afraid of falling and they're going to climb this really, really tall tree. They do it. They do it together. And while they're there, they're having all these conversations. And they're dreamers. They're talking about their dreams for the future. He's pumping Rowdy up. You're going to be in the NBA. You're going to do great. You're going to play for Seattle. We're going to buy air conditioners. This is a big deal. They talk about Turtle Lake. There's a whole thing here about Turtle Lake. I think it's important. This is an important flashback because we have Dad told him the story about Stupid Horse, and Stupid Horse goes into this lake and drowns, right? And then they just disappears, and so they're like, well, I guess it's dead. Well, then he washes up on shore like 10 miles away later on. Then they take the horse's body and they burn the body, but then the lake catches on fire and the horse's body is there again. So it's this spooky kind of legend about Turtle Lake. And you could probably think about it. There's a little deeper meaning to it, so I want you to think about it. But it's also part of showing how he's strong, how he's brave, how he's moving forward. He's a trailblazer, too. We've got this part. He says, "I don't know if anyone else has ever climbed that tree." This is the super tall tree that they climbed. Look at it now, years later, and I can't believe we did it. I can't believe I survived my first year at Reardon. I felt hopeful and silly about the future. So he's starting to recognize the value in the things that he does. And he's proud of himself for the things that he's done. Whereas before he kind of felt like a nothing, right? So this is really good. He feels so hopeful about his future. And who shows up? Rowdy. So Rowdy's been mad at him for the second half of this book. It has been his best friend since birth. And they just pick up where they left off because that's what real friends do. They just pick up where they left off. And it's interesting because Rowdy's definitely been thinking about him. And he says, I always knew you were going to leave. Now, he's not saying this to make him feel bad. He's saying it because he's like, I always knew you were going to leave. I always knew you were going to do something bigger. I am happy for you. He's saying, you have something that the rest of us don't have. And so this is Rowdy being philosophical and kind and really pumping his friend up. And although Junior has now found himself, he realizes who he is and that he's a strong, independent person and that he can leave the reservation, he can still be an Indian, and he can still be part of his tribe and still be with his people. He still kind of feels a little bit of guilt for that, a little bit of betrayal for that. He says, I hope that someday they would someday forgive me for leaving them, and that I would someday forgive myself for leaving them. So although he's found himself and he has this identity and he recognizes who he is, he still has a little bit of sadness in him about growing up, because sometimes growing up is hard, right? That's what he's doing here. He's growing up at the end. And that's the end of the book. So hopefully you enjoyed this. I think it was a good book to recognize how people find their identity, how people grow up, how people persevere through difficult times, how people who are different can make themselves fit in. Not by changing who they are, but by being who they are, which is exactly what he did at Rearden. So, hope you enjoyed it.